Continuing on with part 2 of our overview of the Scalable Microservices course, I'm going to talk about how the assignments will be designed and how they'll be assessed, because that's kind of unique, at least for courses at Vanderbilt CS that are not taught by me. So the programming assignments will be written in so-called modern Java, and I mean really modern Java, Java 19, the latest and greatest version of Java, using IntelliJ. Now, if you have another IDE you want to use for development, that's fine, but your final submission has to work with the latest version of IntelliJ, which I think is something like 2022.3 or something like that, and Java 19. And I'll talk about how to get the IDE here in just a minute. The Java 19 runtime environment can be downloaded using IntelliJ. So you can use that. I'll show you how to do it. You can use that to get the latest version. Java 19 is what you want. I also have some descriptions of how to do this on the wiki site, which gives you some tips on how to install Java and also how to install the Git or configure Git to be used, GitLab. All the source code for the assignments and the examples that we use will be available in my GitHub account. So you can go to this link, and this will also be linked, or is also linked on my course website, which we'll talk about in a second. And so you can find all the stuff. And when you go there, you'll see that there's assignment 1A at the moment, and then after that's done, we'll have assignment 1B and assignment 2A, and so on and so forth. So those things will appear over time during the semester. You'll need to learn how to use GitLab and associated tools, the Git command set. You don't have to know a whole heck of a lot about it, but you have to know enough to be able to clone my repository and pull the code that I provide you as the skeletons and the other project files and unit tests and so on. And you have to know how to be able to push your code to your GitLab repository. And I'll talk in a minute about why I use GitHub and why you use GitLab and so on and so forth. But you'll have to understand how this works. And if you've never used that before, there's a little bit of a learning curve at the beginning, but fortunately we have TAs who can help you get through that learning curve. Occasionally, and I try to minimize this as much as possible, you'll need to update your repository. Obviously, when a new assignment comes out, you'll need to update your repository so you can get access to the code I provide. And also, sometimes there'll be a bug in the skeleton or a bug in the tests, or we'll come up with better tests or something. So from time to time, you may need to pull the repository again. And that's just part and parcel of learning to be a good software developer, is knowing how to use GitHub. The assignments we're going to be doing will provide you with a range of experience with modern Java concurrent and parallel microservices using the Spring platforms as the infrastructure for doing the work. And you'll see that you're going to be implementing a microservice-based movie recommendation system. And I'll show you some examples of this later. It's really cool. And it'll use a bunch of modern Java features. So some of the Java functional programming features, Java sequential streams for a bit of it, Java structured concurrency for a bit of it, Java reactive streams later in the course. And as I mentioned before, we'll be using Spring WebMVC and Spring WebFlux. Things may change a little bit. We're still kind of experimenting. This is the first time we've used this particular example as the motivator for the assignment. But it's pretty neat, and I'll talk about it more. The first assignment 1A doesn't really show off all the cool power of the recommendation system, but later versions will, and you'll get a chance to see how you can write a recommendation engine. Now, here's where things get interesting. So the assignments that you submit will be assessed by course staff, that means me, and this is done through kind of an interesting process. One of the most important things you have to remember, and I'm going to say this over and over again because people tend to forget and then we have problems, you absolutely have to submit your assignments on time or they will not be graded or reviewed. So really, 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 really important. And there's a certain process that you have to follow as well. And all this is described in the frequently asked questions page at my wiki for this course. Now, the way this is going to work is there's a two-process submission model. In the first part, you submit your initial submission. And when you do that, the initial submission is due, and you can find the due date on the website. And you go ahead and submit the program. And then I review it. I review everybody's code. And I send you, well, actually, I push comments to your code as in little / comments that you have to address. And I take all the comments, and then I create a video that kind of walks through what I call the frequently made mistakes, things that people could do a better job with. and then I make a video of that, and that's one of the things you have to learn to watch because those types of issues show up in quizzes a lot. And then you get a few days, depending on how complicated the assignment is, a few days to revise the program based on my feedback, and then you resubmit the revised version, which is then graded by the TAs and the graders. So that's what determines your final grade. And we have an auto grader model, so the bulk of your grade is based on the auto grader or the unit tests that we run. And so you should always know pretty well by the time you submit your assignment what your grade's going to be. And we'll talk more about that in a second. So a couple things that are super duper important. Your initial submission must compile and be largely complete, or you won't get a review or a grade. If you just submit gobbledygook and hope that I will tell you all the things to fix, you just won't get a grade. So you have to take good faith effort to get the initial version done. Something else that's important, you also have to run the regression tests that are given with the assignment and push a screenshot of the results to your GitLab account. And if you watch the video that I put out yesterday that walks through assignment 1A, at the very, very, very end, I show you what I'm looking for. So take a screenshot of running the unit tests. And you can see up here, for the first assignment, 1A, there's 6 unit tests. They should all pass. If they don't all pass, it's not the end of the world, but try to make them pass if possible. But you have to provide this screenshot. And you have to push it in a file in the root of the assignment directory called results, all caps. Really important. If you don't do that, your code will not be reviewed. So there's a couple things you absolutely have to remember to do. And this is good practice for working in the real world. In the real world, when you build software, you have processes to follow. You have to run unit tests in your code before you push to your repository. You have to follow certain guidelines so that everybody works together effectively. And that's important here as well. A couple other things that may be obvious, but it's important to reiterate them. This is not a projects course in the sense of a group project. There will be projects, of course, but they're not group projects. So the work has to be your own, and that applies for quizzes and programming assignments and, of course, the final exam if we have one. So you can't work in groups for this. And since I review everybody's code, it's easy to see when people are copying from each other. The bulk of your grade will be the results of automated unit tests, and there will be extensive automated unit tests for everything that we do. So once again, you can tell what's going on. And another important thing, the assignments are going to build on each other. And it's important that for assignment 2 or 2A or whatever, that you also have things working from the previous assignments as well. And there's a variety of reasons for this. Number one, it's good practice to get in the habit of making sure that you maintain code over time, just like you would do in a real production project. And also, number two, we often improve the unit tests over time. So after we have the first round of submissions, we undoubtedly find very creative ways that people wrote incorrect code. And so we update the unit tests to find those kinds of defects and then report them or test for them. So just because something worked in the first version of your submission doesn't mean it was correct, and the tests will be updated over time to improve capturing problems and defects in the code. So something else really important. So I'm going to say this over and over again, and when you submit your program, you have a little form you have to fill in, and one of the questions is going to be, did I copy all the things from my previous assignments to make sure they work too? Yes or no? So make sure you are careful in doing that. People sometimes forget about this, and then they get very low scores, and they're confused as to why. You have to make sure your code works for the earlier tests and the later tests as well. This is the relative weighting of the course at the moment. Things may change a little bit depending on various factors, but quizzes are worth 45%, programs are worth 40%, final exam, if we have one, is worth 10%, and 5% is for something called participation. So participation includes coming to class, and we're probably going to use the top hat system to keep track of attendance. Secondly, it means being involved, asking questions, making comments, coming to office hours as well, and following directions. Following directions are most important with things like submitting your form that indicates that you've finished your program, and making sure you add the results screenshot to your code, making sure that you submit your stuff by the deadline. It's a fairly large class. It's a lot of manual work on my part, so you have to make sure you keep up with things, and straggling along is not a good way to do stuff. In fact, as you see, if you don't do the initial submissions, You don't get a grade for that assignment. And that's intended to make sure people don't fall behind. Most people in my classes, if they work hard, do very well. There's inevitably a handful of people every semester who just don't bother to come to class. They don't follow the instructions. They don't submit stuff. And then they show up the last week and say, help, I'm failing the course and I won't graduate on time. What can I do to catch up? The answer is nothing. You can't catch up. So this is a course where you have to keep up. If you don't want to have that kind of style, please find another course. But like I said, most people do very well. You just have to keep up with stuff. So make sure you come to class and make sure you read the stuff on the website describing my expectations for people in the class. So participate. That's what being at Vanderbilt's all about, is being people who are leaders and communicate. Very important, great training for the workforce. So don't just sit there passively and have knowledge soak into your brain. Be an active learner. So that's the end of part 2.